Welcome to our new series. I've got a great technique called Embossing Resist. Stick around and I'll show you how. The tools you'll need to create this effect is some rubber stamps, some blending tools, distress ink or water-based ink, an embossing ink pad, some embossing powder, and today what we're going to be using is a new product called Distress Ink Stains. Hot off the press, Distress Ink Stains, they're a part of the fabulous Tim Holtz range. What I'm starting with is some Darkroom Door stamps. This is the leaves set, so we're going to go with a real autumn sort of feel for this particular layout. So I've chosen one of the leaves from the stamp set, and what we're going to be doing first is just creating a little background onto the layout. I'm just inking it up here with Distress Embossing ink. Now this is a clear ink. It's still from the Distress Ink range, which means that it is actually very juicy ink. It stays wet for a really long time and perfect for embossing. So I'm just stamping onto the layout. This is just to create a little background. I'm now just pouring on some white seafoam embossing powder onto the layout. Just tap off any excess. You can see there that the leaf is actually now white. The powder is not set though. The way we set that is just using a heat tool. Now when you're using a heat tool, you want to just go a couple of inches above your image and just hover the heat tool around until you actually see that the embossing powder has been set. You'll be able to actually see there, like that's coming up now, you can see the white is actually really turning a bright white and the actual embossing will become quite glossy. I'm now creating the photo mat for the layout. I'm just using a 5x7 photo, so I'd like to actually distress the edges of the photo mat. What I'm using is some distress ink and an ink blending tool. All you do is just rub the ink blending tool with the foam onto the ink pad, and then starting from the outside of the photo mat, just sponging on some ink onto the edge of the photo mat. This just tones down the colours of the cardstock and just makes it all tie in together when we actually finish our layout. All I do now is just grab my photo and I'm going to stick it on there. So I'm just sticking the photo onto the mat, and now this will be ready to stick onto our layout. What we're going to be creating now is the Distress Ink embossing tags for our layout. And again, what we'll be doing is inking up the leaf stamp with the Distress Embossing ink onto a white tag. Now I'm using just a size 8 white tag as my base. I'm going to be stamping this leaf twice, just to give the tag a little bit of extra fun. Just pouring on some of the white embossing powder. You could also use a clear embossing powder because I am using a white tag. If you use clear, the leaves will still be white. I now have my tag, which has the embossed leaves ready to go. And what I'm going to be using now to actually colour the tag are the Distress Ink Stains. Now these are a lot of fun. All they are is a liquid version of Distress Ink. So the colours are the same as Distress Ink. They're just a whole lot more fun when you're using them on a larger area. They come with a little padded top, so it's a little applicator, and all you do is just squeeze the bottle gently as you're rubbing the ink on, and as you can see, it's actually resisting the embossed leaves. All you need to do now is just give it a little dry. You can let it dry by itself, but if you're in a rush, just use a little heat tool just to dry it off. And just using the ink blending tool, I'm just going to rub around the edge of the tag. So the Distress Ink stain is still very blendable with the actual Distress inks. So you can use the Distress stain just as a base colour if you want to, if you're covering a lot of large areas. which would be absolutely perfect for mini books, or, you know, if you wanted to create a complete background for a complete layout, like the full 12 by 12, you could cover the entire cardstock with distress stain and it wouldn't take you very long at all. So I'm just adding and blending, adding a bit more colour with other distress inks. Inked over the top with a bit of peeled paint, and then again with the Wild Honey ink pads. And there's the finished tag. What I'm going to do now is another little technique with the distress ink stains. This time I'm using peeled paint. You can see how deliciously liquid this is. And how easy was that just to cover that tag. And I just want to show you how the distress ink stains are very similar to the distress ink in that they are still reactive with water. Okay, so I've just dried that tag. What I'm going to do now is a little spritz and flick technique. Now I'm just spritzing a bit of water into my hand and then flicking it onto the tag. And just let that sit for a moment and that'll start reacting with the actual ink. So I'm just going to dab all the excess little droplets off and just give that a quick dry with the heat tool, and that's finished. So I'm just going to add a little bit of Wild Honey distress ink around the edges just to actually add a little bit of extra colour. I'm using sort of real autumn colours, the warm tones of the distress ink palette, just to go with the theme of my layout, but obviously any sort of distress ink colour would be suitable. So I've almost finished the layout. All I need to do now is just attach the tags using a little bit of twine, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to thread that through and stick that down there, just like that. And with this little one here, I haven't actually got any stamping onto that, but what I wanted to use this one for is just some journaling for the layout. So you can just write onto that just with a pen. If you wanted it to really stand out, you could use a white gel pen. As you can see here, this is where I've completed the journaling on my layout. And around the other outside of the layout, I've just stamped some of the extra leaves, but this time I've just used the peeled paint distress ink. Rather than embossing, I've just stamped straight onto it just with the ink pad, just to give it a little bit of extra colour and showing off a few more of the leaves. Thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this technique. I hope you give distress inks a go, and I'll see you soon.